Now Snow White made her way there, wishing she could fix it all, and knowing that was impossible. The least she could do, though, was keep him company. She had just taken her usual spot by his side when she heard a murmur ripple through the room. Half a dozen villagers had made their way into the castle with hopes of talking to the king about the harvest. But now their attention was drawn elsewhere. The air seemed to spark with an energy that had been missing for months. Turning to see what was causing the commotion, Snow White saw a woman enter the throne room. She stifled a gasp. The woman was the most beautiful person Snow White had ever seen. Her eyes were a deep brown. Her dark hair was pulled back into an ornate updo, showing off her long, graceful neck. She wore a green and gold dress in a pattern that reminded Snow White of a peacock's tail. It shimmered in the candlelight, the long train gliding behind her. As she strode forward, her steps were confident, despite the many eyes glued to her. Enchanting. That was the word that came to Snow White's mind as she watched the woman approach them. Her beauty was beyond compare. She dazzled, and Snow White could see a warm smile on her lips. An unfamiliar feeling fluttered in Snow White's chest, and as she turned to her father, the question of who this woman was dwelled on her lips. But she quickly realized it didn't matter who she was or where she came from. Not to her father. The king was rising to his feet, his eyes locked on the woman's, and for the first time since the death of her mother, Snow White saw a flash of emotion cross his face. Stepping forward, the woman offered him her hand. Bowing low, the king lifted it to his lips. There was something powerful in her beauty, something almost otherworldly and magical, like the forest beyond the orchard, full of mysteries one wanted to uncover. Clearly feeling Snow White's eyes on her, the woman took her hand from the king and brought her focus to the girl. Holding out a single red rose, she offered it to Snow White. Raised to be polite, Snow White took the flower. It was perfect and so simple. But as she brought it to her nose, the flower crystallized into diamonds in front of her eyes. The court gasped, wooed by the magic the woman seemed to yield. Snow White looked up, her dark brown eyes locking with the woman's equally brown ones. Smiling, the woman stroked Snow White's cheek with her fingers, and then, as if satisfied that she had done all that she needed to be done, she focused once more on the king. Snow White stood and watched as the pair moved away from the throne. Everyone, including the king and the court, was now under her spell. So no one but Snow White noticed when the rose in her hand turned to ash. As the ash caught on a gust of wind and blew out of the window, Snow White sighed. She wanted her father to be happy, and the woman was certainly beautiful. But she knew that outer beauty did not necessarily mean beauty within. A small knot of doubt formed in her stomach. Her father was sad and lonely. She worried that the woman's beauty might distract him from finding out what she was like inside. Snow White's fears were quickly realized. The king and the woman were married within a week. The new queen quickly began to make changes around the castle, and the warmth Snow White had briefly seen in her smile disappeared. Now the queen walked around the castle, closing windows, shutting doors, keeping the king from his court and the villagers beyond. A coldness took hold, and the queen could often be seen walking with the king, whispering warnings in his ear of dangers that threatened them from outside the castle walls. For her part, Snow White tried to be kind to her new stepmother. She gave her space and respected the queen's changes. She did not think to go to her father when she saw the queen lingering in front of the large ornate mirror in the throne room, with an unfamiliar expression on her face. "Yes?" "Okay." The look had been hungry, driven, much like the look Snow White had seen on the hounds before they were let loose on a hunt. It caused a sliver of worry to build. Who, she couldn't help wondering, was the queen's prey? Was it her? Her father? But still, she tried to understand the woman. Perhaps she had been mistaken. Perhaps the queen was thinking of things greater than them. Perhaps she had grown so fond of Snow White's father that she felt the need to defend him. Yes, Snow White told herself, that was it. For the queen was certainly fearful. She constantly spoke of dangers beyond the walls. But there had never been reason to fear the world beyond their kingdom up until then. The forest and the magic there had always been welcomed and respected. So Snow White wasn't sure the queen's fears were warranted, and she could not get that look out of her mind. But one day, the queen found a note tucked under her pillow. It was a message, written in blood, warning of a great danger to come from the woods. The queen had been right all along. Someone wanted to harm them, and worse, the person, or persons, who wanted to hurt them was from the very world the queen feared the most. No one could argue with her any longer. There was proof now, and that was all the king needed. As he raced out of the queen's chambers, his expression was dark, and he barely gave Snow White any notice as he strode past her. Seeing the anger in his eyes, and having heard about the note, Snow White ran after him. She knew he would not let any harm come to his new wife. He hadn't been able to save Snow White's mother. He would not fail the queen. "Father," she cried, "what are you doing? Where are you going?" But he didn't answer. He just made his way swiftly toward the stables, strapping on a gold breastplate as he went. The soles of his tall green boots hit the ground with resounding clacks, and she saw the hilt of his sword beneath his swinging cape. The palace guard members were already mounted and waiting when they arrived. Word had reached them. Snow White's eyes flashed back and forth over the men she had grown up with. They wore black clothing, and heavy metal chest plates hung from their shoulders. They had never before looked so serious. Usually they were nothing more than ornamental, trotted out for parades or an occasional royal visit. But now their swords were drawn, and underneath them their armored mounts pawed the ground with their hooves, responding to the tension in the air. Snow White took a deep breath, trying to be brave. She thought of her mother and what she might do in that situation. She would be calm, Snow White thought, regal. But then Snow White let out a cry and ran to her father. She threw her arms around him and hugged him. She felt her father's arms pulling her in tightly. For a long moment, they just stood there, father and daughter, locked in an embrace. Finally, the king pulled back. His eyes were soft when he looked down at her. He brushed her long, dark hair out of her eyes. Snow White leaned into his hand. There was so much she wanted to say. "Don't go. Stay. Don't leave me." But the words would not come. As if sensing his daughter's struggle, the king pulled something from behind his back. He lifted it for Snow White to see. It was a locket. The small silver heart dangled from a thin chain, and engraved on the back were 4 words: fearless, fair, brave, true. A sad smile tugged at Snow White's lips. Those were the words her father had repeated to her every day since she was a child. "What is it?" "It's okay." The characteristics of a good king or queen, and now he was giving them to her. Leaning forward, the king placed the locket around her neck. "Hold it close until I return to you," he said. Then, without another word, he mounted his white stallion. He kicked his heels, and the horse took off, cantering out of the courtyard and through the castle gates. Snow White could do nothing but watch as her father disappeared, with the palace guard and the huntsmen following. Snow White lifted her hand to the locket. Fearless, brave. She ran her fingers over the words. She wished she felt fearless at that moment, or brave, but she only felt scared. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw her stepmother watching from a balcony above. The woman met her gaze briefly, and then, without a smile or any sort of comforting gesture or word, she turned and went back into the castle. Snow White had never felt more alone.